Good morning, everybody. My name is Karen Styborski. I'm the chairman of CLAMA, the Conneaut Lake Aquatic Management Association, and I want to welcome you and thank you for coming. We appreciate the interest and the support. I see a number of people who are donors and all different backgrounds. We have board members present, and if you would stand up for just a moment so people can know who's on the board, I appreciate that. And thank you for all of your dedicated time and efforts. Have donors here, we have elected officials here, so what really makes everything that we do special is everybody's passion, and we all share some sort of passion for Conneaut Lake. So thank you very much for coming out. We're going to have a short presentation. I'm here for the update on CLAMA. We've had a successful CLAMA bash this year to start out, and we will be having the porcelain bus drivers here at the end of the season to close the season with a fun party. So keep your eyes open for that. It will be August 24th, and there will be a letter going out with an order form shortly, or you can go to the ERA real estate office in town to get your tickets as well. The harvester operations have been a little bit more challenging this year as usual. Most of us are aware of the construction on Fireman's Beach, and you obviously can't use that area while it's being constructed. So until Wednesday this past week, we've been operating exclusively from the north end of the lake where we can unload. And we have recently been granted a 30-day trial period to use the end of First Street as an unloading point rather than Fireman's Beach. And we believe this to be a win-win for everybody, so hopefully it's going to work out as we expect. Borough Council has granted us that, and it gets us off of Fireman's Beach so that can be more available for the public, and it also hopefully will give us a more permanent home where we have to move the conveyor less, because that's really the hardest part of the operation, is moving it in and out all the time. And we've been doing a lot of analysis to try to see how we can make that easier and better, and have brought in a couple engineers to help us with that. So we're constantly looking at our operation, trying to improve that as well. And we hope also to use that as an educational opportunity to put up some signage and really help the public understand what we do and how we do it and what the equipment is for, so that we can increase public awareness. And I believe at the end of the presentation, Doug's going to talk a little bit more about that. But we really thank the Borough of Conneaut Lake for all of their cooperation and willing to work with us over the years and all of their support. And I think that's about all for me, because we want to try to keep it to our featured speaker coming up. I'm going to introduce Brian Pilarczyk. He is the watershed specialist for the Crawford County Conservation District. He's going to give you a little update on the watershed implementation plan. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Karen. For the past couple of years, we've had speakers that have kind of updated on where the watershed implementation plan is. We've been working on it for a couple of years now with Princeton Hydro, our consultant on the project. And at this point, we're kind of in the stages of reviewing drafts, trying to pull the watershed implementation plan together so that it best represents what we can look to in the future as far as management on Conneaut Lake. Some of the findings, tweaking some of the potential projects that we can look at in the plan. So at this point, it's a matter of reviewing, getting that done. What I can say is by the end of the year, we'll have the plan in place so that can be out for the public to be able to utilize, and especially the municipalities. This is really geared towards guiding the municipalities in the future on how they can help to improve water quality in Conneaut Lake, as well as CLAMA as well, to be able to kind of lead that effort and either keep Conneaut Lake as beautiful as it is right now, or improve water quality. So also some recent events, just that everybody probably has this on their mind. There was a recent fish kill on Conneaut Lake, mostly perch from what I understand. And at this point, there's not much information on where that's at and where that's going, other than that, just to let you know that Fish and Boat Commission has sent their area biologist out to try to take a look at the situation, see what's happening, and go from there. So the only information is that it really isn't information. It's just too recent to be able to get that out. But just to let folks know that there was a response, and the area biologist is out there trying to figure out what's going on at this point. So with that, I'll pull Bob Santora, Dr. Santora, up to introduce our featured speaker.
I don't want to take up a lot of your time, so I wrote things down. I have a tendency to ramble on and on. I'll try not to do that today. But most of you people already know this story. I'm a little bit disappointed at the turnout here, but We can't do anything about that. I'm just going to give you some brief information on the history of CLAMA. There was a period between 1987 and 1995 when nothing was done to the lake at all. Prior to 1987, the state came in every year. A great guy by the name of Russ Meyer came in, and I went with him a lot of times to find out what he was doing and agitate him a little bit. For some reason or other, which I won't get into that now because that's a long story, they stopped doing it in 1987. Between 1987 and 1995, nothing was done. The lake got progressively worse during those years, and by the time 1993, 94 came around, you could walk across the north end of the lake without getting your feet wet. That's when, you know, I had a home on the lake, and I'd come out here on weekends, and I'd spend Saturday, half a day Saturday, digging weeds out from around my dock just to get my boat out. Something had to be done. Everybody tried. George Phillips and a bunch of them all went to Harrisburg. Nobody could do anything. I don't know why. I could never figure that out, and I still don't. We happened to catch Bob Robbins on a talk show on the radio. My wife cornered him, said, "Will you come out and go around the lake with us?" And he said, "Yeah." He did. And he was amazed. He said he didn't think there was anything wrong with the lake. But once we look around, I personally took him up the north end of the lake and I got my boat stuck in the weeds. And he realized we had a problem. He said he would do the best he can. Also, there was a certain gentleman in Harrisburg, not a politician, he was very influential in Harrisburg, who helped me a lot. It also helped a lot. He was Italian, and our whole conversation was in Italian, back and forth. That's when he convinced the state to come back in and give us a 3-year period, trial period. The first year they would come in and do everything they did as before. The second year they would come in with their equipment. We had to buy the herbicides. The third year they just give us some technology help if we needed it. That's when I first met Bill Kirkpatrick. And Bill and I have been doing this now for over 20 years. Actually, it's been a good relationship, you know. What we do is, and it's be very brief, every year, 3 or 4 months, maybe sometimes 5 months in advance, I'll pick a date, retreat to the lake, say May 20th. Been doing that for a lot of years. I just picked that out at the top of my head, I just figured it out. And we very rarely change that date. This past year we had to. At the last minute, I called Bill, and I came up from Florida May 3rd, and I'm looking at the lake, and I don't see anything. The water's too high. I couldn't see any weeds. And I called Bill, and I said, "Bill, we can't do this. We had a schedule for May." And Bill is good. He helps a lot. I mean, he's really an easy guy to work with. And I said, and he told me that, well, as a general rule, because of the severe winter, we're somewhere the 10 to 14 days behind the normal growth pattern. And that's why I couldn't see the weeds. So he did change it. We didn't treat the lake until June 3rd or 7th, something like that. What I do is, prior to treating the lake, I go out on the lake and we treat a very small percentage of the lake. We treat less than 80 acres or less. I go out and I see where the weeds are, where I think they should be treated, and where they shouldn't be treated. And when you're only treating 80 acres out of a 950 some odd acre lake, you have to pick and choose. We have changed a lot. When Russ Meyer, the marine biologist from the state, came, all we ever used on the lake was herbicides. When we got that 3-year grace period, we formed a CLAMA committee, and we thought we had to do something better than, in addition to herbicides. That's when we started thinking about we get to get a weed harvester. And Bill can mention some things about the weed harvester. So we use a 2-pronged approach now. As I say, I worked with Bill for over 20 years. He's a very honest, reliable, easy guy to get along with, and we've had a good relationship, and we do the best we can with limitations. There are a lot of limitations. We don't just go out there and dump crap into the lake. We go out there, we have a permit, and we're limited on what we're allowed to put in the lake. We started out using 1 herbicide for years, but then the plant growth changed, And of course, when it changes, you have to change your herbicide. Now we use 3 different ones. I could go on and talk for hours about permitting, you know, that was a nightmare. There are a lot of other options we looked into, but I'll let Bill get into that. And, but we're glad to have Bill. He does a great job. And on that, Bill, you ready?
Yeah. Good morning. Let's see if this works. I was given my talk, the title of my talk by Brian, and we're going to talk about weed management in Conneaut Lake, achievements to date and potential for the future. And I'm going to focus kind of on what we've done in the past, what we're currently doing, and what you guys need to be aware and think about for going forward in the future. I'm with a company called Aquatic Environment Consultants. We're a professional lake and pond management company that was started in 1987. We're active members in the Midwest Aquatic Plant Management Society and the Northeast Aquatic Plant Management Society. I'm actually a past president of the Midwest Aquatic Plant Management Society, and one of our biologists is a previous board member of the Northeast Aquatic Plant Management Society. We're also a member of the North American Lake Management Society and Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Foundation. So we're active in professional societies that helps us come up with management decisions. The Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Society has come up with a best management practices guidelines for managing invasive species. And we look at that, we follow those types of guidelines whenever we review possible techniques for managing aquatic vegetation. And it is management. We don't just want to kill plants, we want to actually manage aquatic vegetation. Aquatic vegetation is an important part of an aquatic ecosystem. You don't want to get rid of it. It has pros and cons to it. It provides oxygen and habitat for aquatic organisms, provides food for wildlife, recycles nutrients and ties up nutrients, keeps them being available for noxious algae blooms. But excessive growth of any plants can cause problems. And it is the most visible sign of a lake problem. Aquatic vegetation, if you have a bad weed problem, you know it when you go out and try to use the lake. If the fish population's out of balance, you really don't know it. You just go, well, the fishing's not very good at Conneaut Lake, or the fishing's great at Conneaut Lake. It's not as visibly apparent, other than when you have some fish die off from, like it happened here over the past couple weeks, you know that something's going on and needs further investigation. But weed problems, our company does fisheries work and water quality work and aquatic plant management, but the majority of the calls are for aquatic vegetation, because when people can't swim, it affects property values, it affects the way they can use the lake and the safety of getting into the water. When we talk about aquatic plant management, I threw a couple pictures in here. What we try to manage for in a situation like Conneaut Lake is for diversity in the aquatic plant community. You want to have a variety of native plant species that create structure, but also within that structure you have areas for the fish to move, spawn, and obtain their food, so they can feed into these areas. And if you look how this is habitat, but it's open. Invasive plant species, typically the habitat will be crowded, there'll be monocultures, there'll be thick weed beds, and the fish can't actively feed in that. So excessive growth of aquatic plants is responsible for a lot of different things, including deterioration of fish and wildlife habitat. When you have these invasive plants and these heavy monoculture stands, fish can't actively feed in there. They'll hang out along the edges of these weed beds, but they can't really utilize the entire weed bed. It can cause deterioration of wetlands and also water quality. And it can also potentially cause the loss of threatened or endangered species. As far as these invasive species moving in, they outcrowd desirable native plants, and they can outcrowd and compete with some of the endangered and threatened species. In addition to that, you have a reduced recreational activities in the lake. So you have the vegetation, can't use your boat, can't swim, that type of thing, and that ultimately really leads to a reduction in property values of the homes around the lake, and also reduction in tourism dollars. If you're in a tourism community, people don't want to come to the lake, and there's been well-documented cases of where aquatic plants greatly impact the region economically. So I wanted to discuss some misconceptions about aquatic plant management before I get into talking about what we've done at Conneaut Lake and where we're going in the future. You often hear that there's an ideal percentage of plant coverage for every water body. Well, it really varies from water body to water body and what the uses of that water body are. If you have a drinking water reservoir and it is used for nothing but water storage for drinking water, vegetation is not very important. If you have a recreational multi-use facility like Conneaut Lake, aquatic vegetation is important because it plays an aspect in the fishing community, the recreation. If you have an irrigation reservoir where water is only used for irrigation purposes, you don't really need aquatic plants. They're storage units, they're storage facilities. The other thing is it's all about phosphorus. Phosphorus is important for aquatic plants, it's important for algae, but a lot of times people focus too much on phosphorus. Phosphorus is a big problem in lakes. It's something that needs to be controlled, but there's more to lake management than just managing phosphorus. It's important, but it's not the only thing. The other misconceptions are some methods are always good, or some methods are always bad. Saying chemicals are always bad, harvesting is always good, or vice versa. When we talk about aquatic plant management, and the Aquatic Ecosystem Restoration Best Management Handbook reviews a lot of different methods of control, you have to look at them as tools in a toolbox. A lot of times I've used a crescent wrench or a pipe wrench to pound a nail, or even the back of a screwdriver, but a hammer's a better tool. When you want to pound a nail, you use a hammer. When you want to put a screw in, you use a screwdriver. It's the same thing with aquatic plant management. You look at what tool best fits the situation and the type of vegetation that you're dealing with. And so we'll get into that. Other misconception, biodiversity is always desirable. It's usually desirable, but not always. And then the other misconception is all vegetation should be eliminated from a water body. Typically, that is not the case. So just some things. And then to talk about the history with Conneaut Lake, Dr. Santoro went over that a little bit. We first began, AEC, Aquatic Environment Consultants, first began working on Conneaut Lake in 1998. Russ Maurer from the PA DCNR conducted that application. I spent that day riding on the boat with Russ, looking at how he was doing things, and then the following year, Dr. Santoro and I were the ones that were conducting the application. And since that time, that's basically how it's been, is that we worked with Dr. Santoro. I think there was one year we got rained out. He had to work the next day, and we ended up finishing the application that year. The primary focus of our management efforts in the past have been treating for Eurasian watermilfoil. Eurasian watermilfoil is an invasive plant species that was first found in the United States in the early 1900s. The unique thing about Eurasian watermilfoil is, or one of its advantages that it has over the native plant communities, is it gets a jump in the springtime. When you come out here in the end of May, beginning of June, the Eurasian milfoil is getting very close to the top of the surface if it's not on the top of the surface. The native plants are usually lower in the water column, and it can actually outcompete the native plants and create monoculture stands. If you go to the far north end of Conneaut Lake on the western side of the inlet that goes up there, there's a huge weed bed up there of Eurasian milfoil. The Fish and Boat Commission has told us not to treat that area. They want to leave that area untreated for fisheries habitat. And I believe the harvester does not operate in that weed bed either. If you go look at that weed bed today, that weed bed is a monoculture of Eurasian milfoil. Because it's been left unchecked and untreated and uncut, it pretty much is a solid stand of one plant. And I don't think I've ever seen a person fishing up there because it's really not good habitat. When we look at aquatic plant management, what we want to do is control and manage the invasive species and allow for opening up that habitat with native plant species. And if you look in a lot of the treatment zones where we actually treat in Conneaut Lake, you see the diversity in the plant community. You see these other varieties of vegetation that are not impacted by the herbicide treatment. So this is a picture of Eurasian watermilfoil. If you look, you get up here towards the top, you see that the leaflets, the leaves on the plant look like little feathers, and the stem is almost like a piece of twine. And And there's been instances where swimmers have gotten tangled and wrapped in Eurasian milfoil, and even small livestock have gotten wrapped in Eurasian water milfoil beds and drowned because of this plant. But this is, I threw some pictures in here so you can get an idea of the different types of vegetation that we're dealing with. So the management history for controlling Eurasian water milfoil from a treatment standpoint has focused on the use of Reward Aquatic Herbicide is the name of the product. And where we have focused are some of the large beds to thin those out, and also around boat docks and areas that are difficult for the harvester to access. So go in and thin these areas out and allow the harvester to harvest some of these more open water beds. Reward Aquatic Herbicide will control Eurasian water milfoil in Conneaut Lake without impacting most of the native plant species. And that's, I think, one of the biggest misconceptions among the fishermen is they're treating the lake with chemicals, they're killing all the weeds in the lake, and that's certainly not the case. And hence, that's why we've had to switch to some other products, and I'm going to discuss that as well. I mentioned that in untreated areas, Eurasian water milfoil will outcompete the natives and actually form a monoculture, a single stand of one plant with high density. So Dr. Santora mentioned as we've moved through the management program and the treatment of vegetation in Conneaut Lake, we've had some other plants that we've had to deal with in some other areas. For the most part, these are isolated areas back off the lake. They're smaller treatment areas. For the most part, we're dealing with Eurasian water milfoil, and most of the lake is treated with the Reward herbicide. In 2010, we began to treat pond weeds in 1 or 2 locations around the lake where we were getting heavy growth, and these are typical areas that are boat docks or a lot of jet skis. And while we were controlling the milfoil in those areas with Reward, we weren't controlling the native pond weeds. So in those areas, just a couple acres out of the whole lake, we're treating pond weeds with a different product. And then in 2012, Kabamba is I guess a native plant species, but it has invasive tendencies. It typically likes to grow in lower pH waters. So where we found that was being a problem was in some of the backwater areas, that some of these canal channels. The area where we go through the culvert pipe is Hazel Park. So back in Hazel Park, there was a huge stand of Kabamba in there around those boat slips. So we're not treating Kabamba currently in the main body of the lake, but we're treating it in some of the channels around the lake, and we're using Clipper herbicide for that. We originally started using sonar pellets in some of those areas, and we switched to Clipper herbicide as a new product that came on the market and works fairly well on treating Kabamba. So here's what Kabamba looks like. So if you look at those 2 plants, you say, well, gosh, that looks like Eurasian water milfoil. If you look at this, another name for Kabamba is fanwort, because the leaflets fan out like a fan, like the old fans that you use to cool yourself. So while it may appear and say, oh, that's Eurasian milfoil, you need to kind of be aware and update yourself on these 2 types of vegetation, and hence that's why I threw the pictures in here so you can see the differences between the 2. This is native pondweed. We're not interested in managing this in most areas, but in areas where somebody's got a jet ski and there's nothing but boat traffic and nobody's really fishing in that area, we're trying to keep a couple acres open on the lake for that. So some future concerns, I wanted to mention these and kind of talk about this as part of my talk. Hydrilla is a invasive plant species that started in Florida and has moved its way up, I think in Maine. It's even in Maine now in 1 or 2 locations, and it has a significant concern, and I really want to stress from this, it's a real major threat to Conneaut Lake. Currently, this plant is not present in Conneaut Lake that we know of. We haven't seen it, haven't found it, but it's not far away. It's in Pymatuning, and I believe they're treating the majority of it in Pymatuning.
Only about half of it.
They're only treating half of it in Pymatuning Lake. So because of budget concerns, they're only treating half the population over there. So that means half of it is going untreated. A lot of boat traffic back and forth between Pymatuning. Lake Arthur, that's down the road an hour probably, State Park Lake, but a lot of public access points, is inundated with hydrilla. Hydrilla is everywhere around that lake. They treat about 20 acres in at Lake Arthur in, that's, what's the name, Glendale, the state park. Moraine State Park, that's Moraine State Park. So the point is you have hydrilla that's within easy reach of Conneaut Lake, and you have boat traffic that moves back and forth, and that's how a lot of these invasive plant species get transported. They move back and forth from one lake to the other. So hydrilla is a real threat to Conneaut Lake, and the threat that it's going to be is it's going to have huge economic impacts on tourism and property values. Property values could have significant impacts if you get invasive plant species that can't be controlled or are left unmanaged. State park systems, they don't have residents around those lakes screaming. They basically have day trippers that come and use the lake for fishing and that, so there's not a lot of direct hit in the wallet on those types of facilities. Conneaut Lake's a different scenario. And so my advice to the group is that you prepare for this, because it's a lot easier to treat 1 acre of hydrilla and a lot cheaper to treat 1 acre of hydrilla than it is to treat 100 acres of hydrilla. So if it's ignored and it spreads to 100 or 150 acres of Conneaut Lake, it's going to be a tremendous economic impact as well as a lot more money to control and manage this plant. This is what hydrilla looks like. As you can see, here's a monoculture of hydrilla. You couldn't even get a fishing lure through that. I've had small ponds that have been impacted with hydrilla, where hydrilla has pretty much taken over the whole pond, and you do a fishery survey and the predator fish are there and the forage fish are there, but the predator fish cannot feed and access the forage fish because they can't feed because the weeds are too thick. One situation I'm thinking of, we actually went in, did a fishery study for the owner of the pond. We went and the bass were in very, very poor condition. We controlled and managed the hydrilla, and all of a sudden the population shifts back into better balance, and the bass are able to feed and eat and consume the forage, and the fish population is a lot healthier. So you hear fishermen talk about I love fishing hydrilla. They're not fishing in the hydrilla, they're fishing the edge of those hydrilla beds. And what happens is the predator fish, the target fish they're after, particularly the bass, they don't have a lot of options to feed in the bed itself. So the bass all come and lay on the edges of the bed. And the fishermen get down there and fish those edges. And consequently, because of that, the catch rate goes up really high because the bass are hungry. They can't feed in the bed. They're feeding along the edge. The fishermen find easy targets and they're easy to access. So there's been a lot of misinformation about hydrilla. It's good for fishing. It may be good for fishing, but it's not necessarily good for the fishery. And so I want to try to control that if it gets in here. This is actually a weed sample from Lake Arthur, just down the road. So this is not far away. This is just reached in, grab a handful, pulled it up. It's thick, no other plants mixed in with it. So a real threat to this area. What I wanted to point out is it's very closely related to some other plant species. So we have Brazilian elodea, which is also a non-native. It's not as invasive as hydrilla, but it is a non-native. Then, so on the far left is the Brazilian elodea. In the center is the hydrilla, which is thicker. So you just see a little thicker than what the native elodea is. So native elodea looks very similar. It looks very similar to the hydrilla, but as you can see, it is a lot more open and less dense than what the hydrilla is. Elodea typically has whorls of 3, where hydrilla is going to have whorls of 5, and Brazilian elodea whorls of 4 to 6. The real key to identifying hydrilla is this: you have serrations on the leaflets. So if you see a group of plants and you think, gosh, is that hydrilla? You pull it up, the leaves will be serrated like teeth on a knife. Where on the elodea and the Brazilian elodea, you won't have those serrations. Hydrilla also produces tubers in the soil, which are a little harder to find and identify. But if you think you see a big thick bed and it looks like, gosh, that's growing like it's on steroids, it's growing aggressively, you go over and take a piece of plant off and look at it and see if it has those serrations on the leaflet itself.
Are those serrations sharp?
If you grabbed a handful of the plant, you could feel them. You would feel them, but they're not super sharp, okay? Another plant that I brought, I got a call about 10 days ago, 10 days ago, about an invasive plant in southern Mercer County. And this is water chestnut. So on the way here today, I actually stopped and looked at this facility. This is the only place in western Pennsylvania that I know this plant is growing. I think Brian said Warren County, maybe there might be some. But, so it's not far away. This is another plant that's kind of easy to identify. You can look at it, looks different, floats on the surface. Probably not a super huge threat to Conneaut Lake, but to the outlet, once you get below, downstream from the lake, it could be a threat down there, but it's something that you can watch for. So I grabbed this plant, and this is going to go home with me today, far away from here, and be disposed of properly. But I just wanted, while I was down there and looked at it, I thought I'll grab this plant and bring it along and let everybody kind of see what another invasive plant. Typically, invasive plants, when they get in an area, they grow with much more vigor than what the native plants do. So you see stuff that's like, it's really thick, it's heavy, it's aggressive, it could be a native plant species. And I encourage you to work with the Conservation District, with Brian. If you see any plants that you are concerned that might be invasive plants, either in Conneaut or anywhere else in the county, to get in touch with Brian. And he works with Pennsylvania Lake Management Society and try to coordinate efforts to identify and control and eradicate those. So, what can you do to control and manage invasive plant species? They're important to all of you in this room, all of you watching on TV or listening, because they have potential economic impacts to all of you. Make sure that the boats that are coming to and leaving the lake are free from invasive plant species. And you need to really get down and look and search a boat. Every one of our boats, we travel from lake to lake, and we're very, very aware of invasive plant species. We go over all of our equipment every time that we move from place to place to make sure that we're not transporting invasive plant species. Our trailers are not tubular built. They're built with channels so we don't get weeds inside the tubes. But check axles, around tire rims, around your boat motor, that type of thing. And don't transport any vegetation from one lake to the other. The other thing is educate the public about the management of invasive plants and their negative impact, and that's what we're doing here today, and hopefully all of you can take this and go forward with that. Monitor and report any sightings if you see invasive plants, particularly hydrilla. Hydrilla, I have no doubt, will end up in Conneaut Lake at some point, and we need to watch for it. It's probably going to be more around the boat ramp is probably where we're going to see it, where people launch their boats. That's normally where we first find it. And if we can find it early and attack it and control it, it's much easier and less financial impact in the future, both on property values and budgets. The other thing that I encourage you to do, this is CLAMA, this is the meeting of CLAMA, the group that's tasked with managing aquatic vegetation in Conneaut Lake, and I challenge you to have a budget ready to go to manage hydrilla if and when it ends up in Conneaut Lake. It's something we'll watch for, but you're the eyes that are out there on the lake. I encourage all of you to be aware and look for this plant as you're out there. So that is all that I have. I don't know if there's any questions or any other discussions that you would like me to go with. Questions?
Questions? Do you have a handout that includes the pictures of the various?
This, I do not. I think there's some over here. I don't know if Brian has any, maybe on the table over here. This will also be available publicly, I think, via video. So you can kind of look at some of the slides that I have there. I don't know if you want to copy the PowerPoint, some of the photos, or I could email some photos if you have a way to. Does CLAMA have a website? You have a Facebook page? I could get some pictures, probably email some of those pictures of hydrilla so that you can put them on your Facebook page. People kind of know what to look for. I think that one photo that I have in here with the serrations on that shows on the leaflets is very, very good for identification purposes.
Bill, could you briefly comment on what impact the harvester has on our weed control?
Yep, the harvester, I'm not actively involved with the harvesting, but I'm aware of what it is. Harvesting is a good technique to, manage plants in a large area, in an open area. The real one big aspect about using the harvester is public perception of the harvester is a lot more positive than it is using herbicides. Typically tell people that you're using herbicides, they think you're destroying the environment, and when you use a harvester, they tend to think that you're not. There's debates back and forth as far as which is better environmentally. But it's certainly another tool in the toolbox that's worked well here and has a good fit. Yes, ma'am.
What can be done about the dead fish that have floated in?
Sorry, about the what?
The dead fish that have floated.
The dead fish that are floating. I have not been out to see the dead fish and observe that. The Fish and Boat Commission from Lionsville's had their biologists down here. I've been involved in some emails and have been up to date on the information of the dead fish. The dead fish that are currently on the lake are mostly yellow perch. I believe there are some gizzard shad that they're seeing that are associated with that. There's a variety of different things. Typically, when you have a fish kill, if it's one species, it's usually a disease or a parasite or something like that that's unique to that species. When you see multiple species dying, it's usually something else. But so it's probably an internal parasite or a disease or a fungus or a bacteria that are affecting that perch community. Typically, when we see fish kind of run their course, a lot of times a common killer of fish is columnaris disease, which kills a lot of the sunfish in the spring of the year. And those types of instances where you have disease in a fish community will run about 2 weeks and run its course over a period of about 2 weeks or so.
And the answer to that question is that when we had the fish kill probably 8 or 10 years ago, CLAMA, again, is one of our functions. We cleaned up all those fish, and there were thousands of them. We took them out and we buried them. We'll do the same thing here. It was going to start today, but the wind's too high. We can't get our harvester out in the lake, but on Monday, as soon as the wind dies down, we'll get rid of the dead fish.
Right, so they will clean up, the CLAMA will be responsible for helping with the cleanup efforts of the fish. Fish and Boat Commission, from what I understand, was out here yesterday, and they did not find any fish that were in the process of dying. And for them to actually get a sample to take back to their lab for analysis to find out what's going on, they actually need fish that are partially alive but heading in the opposite direction. Yes, sir.
I just want to say thanks for your presentation, very informative, and thanks to the Conservation District as well on your efforts here at the lake. So you talked a lot about endpoints in terms of weed management and dealing with the problem after it's already here. Can you talk a little bit about some of the maybe preventative things to decrease potential weed growth, such as phosphorus runoff from the watershed into the lake, and how that impacts part of the equation in terms of weed growth as well?
Right. Phosphorus, the question was, what are some other potential things that can be done to better manage the lake? Phosphorus management is appropriate. Phosphorus management basically is more important to algae than it is to vascular plants. Vascular plants are more nitrogen dependent and less phosphorus dependent. Algae are phosphorus dependent, and the nitrogen they can obtain from the atmosphere, because the atmosphere is mostly nitrogen. So controlling phosphorus will greatly help with algae blooms. And Conneaut Lake has not been a lake that has had significant severe algae blooms. But certainly if you add enough phosphorus to Conneaut Lake, you're going to have significant algae blooms. And I encourage you, if you go home today, is just get on the internet and search for toxic algae blooms, because it's red hot in the news right now with Lake Okeechobee. There's some lakes in New York State, and I suspect as we get into summer here, a little later in the summer, we're going to be hearing more about Toledo's water supply. Algae can produce health impacts to humans, fish, and animals. So there are algal toxins that are out there. So certainly managing the phosphorus, managing the nutrients in the watershed will help with phosphorus. As far as the rooted vegetation, managing and controlling the invasive species, particularly the introduction, as we've discussed, of hydrilla, is trying to keep plants like that out of your lake, because they will have a negative impact. So it's not that there's one solution for all things, but multiple things that should be on the plate from a management standpoint. Does that address most of your question?
And prevention is a whole lot cheaper than management afterwards. So like on Pine Tuning State Park at this point, they have a launch steward program to address boats that are coming in and leaving, and making sure that they're not carrying something to another waterway. That's something that could go a long ways here at Conneaut Lake as well. Is making sure it doesn't come in the first place, making sure the trailers that are coming in aren't carrying plants on them or even animals, mussels and whatnot on them. Pine Tuning's had a number of saves in the past 3 years, where Kabamba is not in Pine Tuning at this point. The launch stewards caught boats that had Kabamba hanging off the trailers and had them remove that before they were able to launch onto the lake. So that's a whole lot cheaper than the management. Once it gets in the lake, then it's harder to keep control of it.
And it's hard to, I mean, the question, I don't know what's being heard here over the video, but the question was what can be done to prevent invasive plant movement from one spot to the other, is cleaning the boat trailers. And I think people, biologists like us who work on lakes and understand us, are much more aware of what we're transporting and what we don't want to transport. We know which species are, you know, more of a threat to different areas. Fishermen, I think, look at it as, well, they're plants, they're vegetation, and they're fish and eat plants. They're not necessarily bad, and there's a lot of plants that are introduced to, quote, improve fish habitat. I suspect that this water chestnut, the reason that it got there is because there's duck hunters that love to hunt that pond, and ducks feed on this. So you have a plant that grows aggressively that's appealing to the waterfowl. What better place to put it than in our hunting spot? And so you have unintentional introductions of invasive plants, but you also have intentional introductions. And my hope is that no one would intentionally introduce hydrilla to Conneaut Lake, because it's significant negative for everyone involved, including those fishermen that think it might be beneficial.
That is a really good point. That leave the stalking and the planting to the professionals, and you know, stay away from midnight introductions of either fish or plants or anything else along those ways.
Yeah, Brian mentioned there, I don't know if everybody heard about, stay away from fish introductions too. I've seen lakes that the fisheries have been destroyed by well-intentioned fishermen that bring white perch or something like that into a lake, gizzard shad, alewives, thinking that they're going to benefit and actually have negative effects, and none of us want to see that. We want the lakes like Conneaut are multi-user lakes. They're important for all lake users, not just the people that live here, but the people that come and fish. And education, as we talked about, is a big aspect of this, and educating the fishermen that they are part of the preventive process. They don't want to take initiative and try to do something that will, in the long term, negatively impact them. And I think there's been a lot of the aquatic plant management associations have worked with BASF to try to educate and get them to understand that, you know, things like hydrilla, while they may be fun to fish around, actually in the long run are negatively impacting these fisheries rather than positively impacting the fisheries. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Do you find Pennsylvania's approach to resolving this problem to be typical across the country, or how do they do it in other states?
So now I'm getting into politics. And you asked, so I'm going to answer. The question was, how is Pennsylvania's response to invasive plants versus how other states are dealing with this? I'm trying to think because my brain's not working right. I was the first person to find hydrilla in Pennsylvania. It was at a kettle lake in Bradford County, gosh, 25 years ago maybe, something like that. And I got called in because they needed a grass carp permit to control and manage Elodea in their lake, which was one of the three on the slide up here. And I went, and I'd been to Florida and I'd seen hydrilla and I was aware of hydrilla, and I went to this lake and I'm riding around looking at it, and I'm like, man, that's really aggressive looking Elodea, but it must be Elodea. And I've got about a third of the way around the lake, and I'm like, this can't be Elodea. This can't be Elodea. And I went over and I grabbed it, serrated leaves. Okay, so I'm like, okay, we got serrated leaves. So the next thing I did was I dug for tubers, and if you find tubers, 100% confirmation it's hydrilla. I took a sample, I shipped it to the University of Florida, and hydrilla was identified in Pennsylvania. I called the state. Said, you got hydrilla in Bradford County, what are you going to do? Nothing. Nothing and nothing and nothing was done for hydrilla. Now it's in the state park systems. State parks, and I'm probably going to get in trouble, somebody's going to chew me out in the future, whoever sees this, is state parks have more hydrilla growing on their land than I would say all the rest of Pennsylvania has hydrilla added together. So I think a lot of these infestations are coming from the state park system. States like Missouri, states like Indiana, when they have a rapid response program, when they find hydrilla in those states, the goal is eradication, and they're putting a lot of money towards that. Now, are they going to be able to stop it? Maybe, maybe not. May they prevent huge economic impacts for the next decade or 2 decades? That could be the case. But the point is they have funds and they're addressing it when it's small. So where you stand as Conneaut Lake, you can't count on the state to protect Conneaut Lake. You have to protect Conneaut Lake yourselves. So what you need to do is you need to be aware. When it's found, you need to be ready and aggressively manage it and control it to keep it from spreading, because it's going to come here and it's probably going to come from a state facility, from a state-owned state park lake, because those are the big areas that have hydrilla that are close to here. Pymatuning, Lake Arthur, they have them. People that use those lakes as a public dock on Conneaut Lake, it's probably where it's going to come from. So where's Pennsylvania in relationship to other states? I think that they are not very proactive at all in managing hydrilla, particularly. They do some with some other plants, but the hydrilla is an important thing. I think the conservation districts, and there's some funding, Brian's more aware of that, are trying to address some issues, and they're trying to work at Conneaut Lake, but it's budget. It takes a lot of dollars to do this, and it takes a whole lot less dollars to treat 5 acres of hydrilla than to wait until you have 200 acres of hydrilla. So you as a group, as CLAMA, be prepared, be ready to go, and you need to treat it chemically to control it. Cutting it with a harvester will only spread the problem. You need to control it chemically where it is before it produces these tubers. Hydrilla spreads from tubers. They're like little potatoes down in the ground that they produce, and you need to kill the hydrilla before it gets to where it produces tubers, and then you have to keep treating it to use up that tuber bank. We're currently working on a project on Deep Creek Lake in western Maryland, and they have the funds because they have homes on that lake. So here's a public lake with houses, and they charge boat dock fees, so they have revenue to address the situation. And their goal, 3,000 acre lake, their goal is to treat and control hydrilla. And you would probably have a hard time going there today. Hydrilla's been in the lake for probably 5 years. You would probably have a hard time going there today and filling much more than a 5-gallon bucket with hydrilla, because they're searching it out, they're finding it, they have a hard program, and they're attacking it and addressing it where it is to prevent it, to burn up the tuber bank before it gets established and is able to build a tuber bank up. Yes?
What is the cost to do that?
What is the cost for that project? That project runs anywhere from probably $100,000 to $200,000 annually on a lake with 100 acres of hydrilla. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. You know, we at CLAMA have been discussing hydrilla for several years now. We're lucky enough to have a couple of board members that also serve on the Pennsylvania Lake Management Society board, and we've been trying to keep as up to date as possible. We are not able to file for a permit preemptively, but we're prepared to do so as soon as we are aware that it's here. And, you know, hosting some of these talks and getting as many people aware as possible so that everybody that's out there is looking for it and can inform us when they see a threat is the biggest thing that we're trying to do. And just preparing so that we are prepared. We've been aware of this for a while, working with Bill and Palms, and we're trying to do our best. So anything that you guys see, you need to hear of it right away, so you can communicate that to Brian and he can get it all tested and run through those proper channels.
And I figured I just would update a bit as far as Pymatuning State Park. This is the greatest effort that they've been able to put forth this year as far as management of hydrilla. So as far as state parks go, Pymatuning is hopefully the trend that'll move towards the future. State Parks is putting money into Pymatuning, especially because of the economic benefit that the park brings to the local community. It's the highest revenue producing park in the state park system. So this year we finally were able to pull enough money together between the Conservation District, DCNR, Ohio Department of Natural Resources. It's been a large-scale effort, but it's taken a number of years to actually pull that much money together to be able to make the actual application this year. The problem is that the lake had that many years to gain traction. As Bill said, rapid response is one thing that you have to get on quickly. In Pennsylvania right now, there are no rapid response funds for aquatic invasive species when they come in. That's hopefully something that will change in the future, but it's going to take time. State government moves slowly when turning things around and pulling these things in. So, but I wanted to let you know that Pymatuning does have an effort in place. It's the largest one right now in the state as far as hydrilla management. But there are other lakes around, like Bill had said, Lake Arthur, that don't have an aggressive management program right now that we have to be aware of and have to be aware of it coming in. So we're trying at Pine Tuning to turn it around. The launch steward program that's there, trying to address boats that are coming in and out, the management that's taking place coordinated between Ohio and Pennsylvania, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to end up here in Conneaut Lake. We need to be aware of that, or local ponds that are around the area. So being aware of it and catching it quickly, we can avoid, like you asked the question, how much does this cost? I don't think anybody's aware of how much it really costs to try to treat a large infestation once it gets ahead of you. So the point that Bill made, the point that I try to make.
What are they spending at Pine Tuning, because they're treating how many acres?
This year, it's around 800 acres of the reservoir. It's a 17,000 acre reservoir.
And how many acres are there? So they're treating 800 acres.
That's the treatment blocks. That's not how much hydrilla is out there, but that's how much they're trying to treat.
What's that budget?
I don't have the numbers offhand to be able to tell you, but that's
Big.
it's big. It's a very big budget. So the amount of money that's trying to come in between the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative funding, Pennsylvania DEP has chipped in with Growing Greener, Ohio Department of Natural Resources. It's taken a lot of effort to try to pull together multiple sources of funding to actually be able to address the problem. The state park system actually did chip in money towards, quite a bit of money towards that this year, and that's why we were able to make the larger application. Was a bit of money from, a good bit of money from the state park system to be able to do that. So it's a difficult task once it gets to that scale. We want to make sure in Conneaut Lake that we don't get to that scale, that we catch it early if it ends up here or when it ends up here, and that we're able to actually be able to afford that. Because as Bill said, it's a private lake. The state's not coming in to assist with that. There are no funds out there to help us with it unless we put them there ourselves, or we find outside grant funding sources that we try to pull from, but those are really limited. So be aware of it. Let's try to catch this before it happens and before it gets to that level.
Yes, as most of you in the audience know, we are completely self-funded. CLAMA gets their funds from our fundraisers and from our generous donors. And we've had several grants over the years, but the grants usually are more applied to preventative measures such as watershed improvements and things like that. Our first harvester was purchased with the assistance of one of those grants as well. So we do get grants, but they're more in the background. You don't see them when we're not going to probably get one necessarily to pay for herbicides. But CLAMA is preparing, and we are going to react aggressively as soon as we are aware there is a first sighting. So we appreciate all the support from all of you guys for that. And I'm just I forgot to thank Armstrong for showing up early today as well for filming this, so other people that aren't here can view this later. And then I'm just going to let Doug Peters wrap this up here and share a couple stories. So thank you. Thank you all for coming out today.
Thank you, Karen. I am the treasurer of CLAMA, and I came here about 7 years ago when I was invited to a board meeting, and the passion that these folks have for caring for this body of water, certainly to be commended. There's not a lot of people. We certainly can use some help if you have an interest, if you know folks that might be interested in assisting us. We certainly would welcome your participation. I wanted to close this morning by telling you a story of a lake that I was lucky enough to tour up in Wisconsin. And Bill, to your point, I found a very proactive cooperation between homeowners and state government in the state of Wisconsin. I'm sure you folks did the math when Bill said how much it was to treat. I believe that ended up being $1,000 an acre to treat hydrilla. So to your point, if we have 100 acres, that's a lot of money. Your CLAMA budget does not operate on a lot of money. As Karen said, it's strictly donations. This small lake that I visited in Wisconsin was very similar to Conneaut. It was populated with homeowners around the perimeter. The lake itself was 470 acres. The name of the lake was Little Muskego Lake. And it started out being a natural lake, and then assisted by some damming, ended up turning into a reservoir. So 470 acres. The state of Wisconsin manages all of the herbicide treatment on the lake. They carry the funding, they perform the action. But the thing that really got me as I toured this lake was they had 4 weed harvesters. We have one. They had 4 unload sites with a conveyor posted at each one. Those conveyors are $30,000 a piece. And those homeowners around that lake made sure that they were vigilant in creating the proper care sites, because this lake was pristine. I was just amazed at how clean this lake was as I went around. But here comes the kicker. Being a private lake in the state of Wisconsin, it had a homeowners association. If you owned a home on the lake, you were charged $600 a year. And if you were 1 block off the lake, you also paid a fee that was reduced versus the lakefront owner's fee. But if you take an average of 300 houses around this lake, and if we had $600 per house, that would give me a budget of $180,000 to be able to manage this lake per year. CLAMA uses 1/6 of that in our budget to manage your lake, which is twice the size of the lake I'm talking about. Now, I think we can't be so naive to think that we can mandate people pay $600 a year to have you know, a volunteer nonprofit organization manage the hygiene of this lake. But nonetheless, this, I thought, spoke volumes of what people can do collectively when they care that much about the area where they live. And I wanted to share this story because somewhere a seed gets planted when good things happen. And I would like to thank all of you for taking your time this morning. To Armstrong, we always appreciate your participation. And to each and every one of you, please go tell our story. Because when you tell our story, good things will happen. Pardon me? Yeah.
Sorry, I forgot one thing. I failed to mention that I really wanted to make a thank you for Jim Hunt. He's been running our harvester program for the last several years, and he's brought us to a whole new level of efficiency, and he's just really done a great job for us. So he's in the audience as well. So thank you, Jim.
That's perfectly okay. We hired 2 more people this year. We have the strongest staff for our harvesting operation in a long time. And Karen mentioned to you the educational outreach. We really have a great intention, and we think we're going to be able to get this done. We have 2 folks that really do well speaking publicly, and we're going to be sending them out during the off season to tell our story at associations and meetings where people, you know, are interested in what we do. So you're going to see the services CLAMA provides expand. And down at the south end of the lake, as Karen mentioned, where we hope to have a permanent home for the conveyor, we intend to have professional signage. So it enhances the experience of those who come to Ice House Park that want to enjoy firemen's. They're going to be able to see what we do, why we do it, and I think it's going to go a long way to telling our story as well. So folks, thank you for coming today. It's been a pleasure, and hope to see you next year's Lake Talk.